Welcome, everybody. Good morning. We got a nice crowd here. Yay. No. All right. So today, our presentation, we're calling it a true tale of operational graduate student enrollment. And we're going to talk to you a little today on how we identified, processed, reported results for reconsidering graduate applicants. And we use a myriad of systems from Alteryx, Google Sheets, Question Pro, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Tableau. All of those actually encompass this one project. Okay, oops. We don't have a clicker, so I apologize for that. So if it's a little chunky, that's why. All right, so here's our little agenda today. So we're going to go over our goal, the reporting of the initial data set, our intake process, the data transformation process, the reporting, our future applications, and then we have some time for question and answers at the end. But if you have one right away, it's okay if you ask it up front too. And who are we? So for the camera, we have the camera too. So if you see us going back and forth, that's why. I'm Amy Felix. I'm a business analyst in the Graduate College. I've been with ASU since January of this year. So fairly new to ASU, but have already gained a lot of knowledge here and love being here.
And I'm Jeff Long, I'm the team data analyst principal for the Graduate College. Sometimes there's more words, sometimes there's less words. I show up anyway. I've been here, I'm going on 7 months here at ASU, so I'm still a little bit new, cranking through things, but hopefully I got something to share. So.
All right, so what was our first thing we had to do? So we wanted to increase graduate student enrollment. That's what was our initial goal. And what we did was we partnered with Enrollment Services and Ed Plus with an initiative for fall 2022 was our goal. We wanted to increase the access of graduate applicants for our programs, and we wanted to focus on students that were in good standing, which was a 3.0 or higher. And one of the, again, big goals was for future, if there was a specific way we can more automate this, where they weren't denied upfront, and we could get them enrolled into other programs, maybe not their own, maybe a different one that they were a better fit for. And this was the goal that we were presented as the data team. So we're both part of the data team, Jeff and I. Oops, okay. So here's where we came into play, is we had to support now this initiative, and we had to think through the process. How are we going to get these denied applicants reconsidered? And we had to identify who those students were. That was some of the tasks we had. The academic units had to let us know who those applicants were going to be. We had to consolidate all the requests. We had to then send that to admission services, and some admission services would then update the records to be sent to committee. We needed to be as efficient as possible, where the academic units did not have to be the ones going to admissions. It had to be easy for them to input the information that we needed to give to admissions. So there was a lot of questions. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get the data? How are we going to compile it to make it spit out to a good, easy data set? So there's a lot of things that we had to think about. This is where our journey is going to take you, is like how we got there. So this is our process that we're going to actually go through today. So we're actually going to touch on each one of these areas, how we identified the students, and we used Alteryx and Tableau for that, how the academics submitted their request to us. We used Question Pro and Google Sheets. We then transformed the data to Google Sheets and Alteryx. We then notified the students and admissions using Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We then notified admissions so they can retrieve the information that we were giving them using Google Sheets. And the reporting at the end was through Alteryx and Tableau. And Jeff and I actually were part of we're the product owners for some of these steps in between. So we really worked together to really help get this out there. So it was a real collaborative effort. And we did have a lot of trial and error. We'll go through those as well, what we kind of went through. So first is what we had to do was set the parameters and guidelines for the academic units. Who were they going to reconsider? So first was what we wanted to happen. Again, we wanted to be efficient for us as ASU and also for the applicants. So we weren't going to have them reapply at all. That was one step. Also, the transcripts that are still required. So the academic units were the ones that were going to double check those applications to make sure all of the information was there, that they had the grades, the transcripts, everything that was in App Extender. So that's what they were going to check. And they did that up front. And then what we on this round, applicants that required a visa were not included in this time frame. And the reason is because we had less than 3 months before fall started when we started doing this. We started, I think, middle of May, end of May is around that time frame. So that only gave them 2 months. So there was no way the I-20s could be completed in time for them to be included in this. So that's why they were not considered during this time. And then the request for reconsideration were only going to be for those applicants that they intended to be admitted. So if they were kind of not sure, we only wanted those that they for sure, you know, they tagged her and said, okay, we want her in our program for sure. It wasn't like, I think she can make it. No, it had to be, we wanted you. Sorry, this is not my computer, so I'm kind of clicking, kind of comes clumsily. All right. So how did we do it? We did it in phases. So the first wave, the priority was given to the program they applied for originally. We wanted them to relook at them and say, should we reconsider them at this point? That was our first phase, and I think it lasted a couple weeks. And then after that happened, our wave 2 was, okay, now another college can go and say, you know what, I think they fit us. I want them for my program. And then we also were communicating to the applicants. We knew we all wanted that communication coming from Dean once, that they're being reconsidered, because they had no clue this was going on, because we didn't tell them, or they didn't even know it was a possibility that this could happen. So when we were building this, we realized, well, there could be duplicates, because in wave 1, somebody could have claimed them. Wave 2, somebody else could have claimed them, or vice versa. 2 people could have claimed them in wave 2. So that's something we had to consider as well. And then after that is when we let admissions know who was reconsidered for the students. So those are the parameters that we were set up with as data. And then I'm going to go ahead and let Jeff explain how we got to the initial data set.
All right, so I'll start with, hey, could we have a report of denied applications? Well, I guess you can. One note, we're going to look at some workflows. I know that's why you came today. But when you look at these workflows, you're probably going to say, I could write a better workflow than that. I'm going to say, in the words of Val Kilmer and Tombstone as Doc Holliday, you're a daisy if you do. Because sometimes you just got to get it done. So you kind of put function over form. But what I was working with is, luckily enough, admissions is kind enough to have a pretty nice data dictionary published out there and available for folks. So I work primarily off of ASJ ADM application, which is a table that records all of the applications they receive for any applicant across the university. And what I did is say, well, let me look. The real basic down and dirty is I look for grad level applications that had been denied, and then put some of the criteria into place. So we looked for those international students that wouldn't be able to get a visa in time. So really, we just limited it to online international applicants that had been denied. They had to meet certain criteria in terms of GPA equivalencies, and we threw into the report some other fields that we were informed that would help some of those decision makers evaluate and determine which candidates they wanted to reevaluate for admission. What I was also doing within this is basically referring back to that same table. I was looking for where they admitted for another program sometime within the same time period. So I was admitting anyone who's already admitted to another degree seeking program. That's another qualifier there, is we were looking at degree seeking candidates. And then also within this, and this was not the last time I referred back to that table, I was also looking to see, is there another application in the pipeline? So another application that's not been denied yet, hasn't been accepted or admitted yet. Just to make a note, we put an indicator on the report to say, hey, just so this person knows there's another application out there for this person. But if they wanted to take a look at that and just verify the results again, verify the data against that, they could. So all this kind of came together into what we will produce for the users. And so this was used, I mean, for our internal staff, for our graduate college staff to do some initial review, but then primarily this was for external users who are doing the reevaluation along the way. And let's see if I can actually just advance it one slide. And I cannot. It's one of those days. So this is a rough outline of what the report looked at. And of course, I could have put this up and just blurred everything, but I don't know if everyone's had their foot patrolling. So I'm trying to be a conscientious data custodian. But you'll see we were highlighting what's their application number, their application date, the last action date on the application. A lot of that, those first few columns or rows in the Tableau world are application data that we refer back to later in the process, and then information about the student, looking at demographics, and then over here on the side is a bunch of academic information about their qualifications coming in. We also set up a series of filters that kind of align with that, so that an external user from a particular college or department could pretty easily filter out which students they'd want to look at and revisit, or they could look at another college or another department to look at and review for that same purpose. There we go. I don't know. Got a little twitch in me today, I guess. So overall, when we're looking at this in terms of the criteria for that report, we were looking at within that admissions table, an admit and cohort term where they're both valued as fall 27 or fall 22, excuse me, 2227. That when we're looking at future applications, stuff like that, that was loosened up a little bit in terms of the search criteria, but in terms of our base population, we were looking specifically at those two terms. We were looking for a 3.0 undergraduate GPA equivalency. So those of you who are familiar with my admissions data, they're sending it coming on a 4-point scale or 4.3 or 4.5, a 5-point scale. There's a number that kind of fall in that barrier, but then we've got 10-point scales and 20-point scales and 100-point scales and all sorts of things. And so we really get some basically some basic formulas from admissions for how those equivalencies are calculated, and use those to interpret that as what met the 3.0 guideline. Again, we talked a little bit about the international population that we were targeting. And then also we were specifically eventually looking at master's degrees. When we started the whole process, we were looking at doctoral and master's students. Then kind of after we started, they pulled it back to just master's students, which actually became one of the lessons learned, because then we had some doctoral students being reconsidered for master's programs, which some of them did not necessarily take kindly to. So we got some customer feedback about that one. But this is kind of overall what we were looking at in terms of identifying those denied applications we were targeting for reconsideration. Yeah, Amy, I think you'll talk about the process.
My turn now. Now then, like Jeff was approached, I was approached. Hey, how can we get the academic units to submit who they want to reconsider? It's like, okay, let's see how we can do that. I was thinking of all the different ways that we can do that, because once they had the data, now how can they do it? So we had a couple options. Google Sheets, using the Google Sheets that Alteryx, we can pull something out. I'm gonna do participation today. Why is Google Sheets not maybe a good choice? Right. Prone to error. Yes, it was prone to error. I could put something in and then Jeff go in and erase what I did. Now you lost what I did. That was one big thing. So it was a big security issue because of that. And is the data clean? No, yeah, it gets kind of muddy. So let me look at Qualtrics. So this was like in April, May. April, May, Qualtrics was what? Why was Qualtrics not a good option in April and May? Oh, okay, thank you. All right. Yes, at that point it was being discontinued. Thank you. So that was an option because why build something if I have to, then do something different because it's going away. Now we're in what's November 1st. Well, that's a little bit different now because now it's kind of staying a little bit, but that wasn't a good choice. Question Pro. Question Pro was the answer to Qualtrics. It was new, still shiny. I had used it on a different project, so I kind of knew it a little bit. And then there was Google Forms. It was kind of close to it, but Google Forms, I don't know, personally was kind of limited because of just the aesthetic of it as an end user. Not a lot of customization, so it really wasn't a good option. So we actually went with the new shiny product, Question Pro. Again, I had used it for another project, so I kind of already knew it a little bit and was able to kind of make some decisions on it. The first thing, again, was a security function of it. I was able to enable the SSO. So whoever, because this was admissions, we had to, kind of tie it down, but not so much because there's so many different departments. It's hard to just specify just to one person that we wanted it open, but still some security on it. The good thing with Question Pro, when you do that, it does mark it in the data set who logged in. So I had a marker who actually did it. Oh, sorry, this. The other part of it is end user feasibility. Again, I'm able to customize it. With Question Pro, I'm not sure, again, I wasn't really a Qualtrics user, so I'm not sure if it could do this, but with Question Pro, I was able to customize my theme. So I was able to customize all the colors to actual ASU brand standards. It hadn't been done yet with Question Pro on the ASU side. I think we were still working through things, but I was able to customize it that way. And I had to make sure we were using easy to read questions. So based on the data set that Jeff had provided, it was, okay, what information do we need now for admissions? And really just make it simplified. And with that, we played around with the design of it. With Question Pro, there's different matrices you can use. There's some that have drop downs, or some that are just spreadsheets. And we actually tested each one of them to see how the data would output. And the multiple choice one, actually the way it was parsing out the data, parsing it out, it made more work for Jeff at the next step. So we didn't go that way, but we went with the basic matrix view on that. And then we also added a signature field. I was also on the Adobe Sign project. So for me, I was already in let's get signatures for things. Even though with Question Pro, there isn't that same security on the signature, still, if somebody goes in to put something, they have to sign something, there's a little bit more in psychological ways, like acceptance, like more of a accountability of it, that I signed off that I want this person readmitted. And then the data extraction, again, we had to find a way where it could easily import and go to Jeff. So we also could manually export the data if we needed to. We use the email function in Question Pro. That way, every time somebody submitted it, we both got it, and that helped later on with our quality control. And then also, I integrated it into Google Sheets. And on that one, I will not take full credit on it, because actually, if you do a help with Question Pro, they are very helpful. So Akshay with Question Pro and then Michael were very helpful, because I was asking a lot of questions, because we were trying different logics, different ways to form the questions. They're very helpful with that, and they're the ones that kind of helped me with the Google Sheet integration, and we tested that out with them. So thank you if you are listening, because that really did help out on the project. And then also, because we weren't sure how this was going to pan out, we needed to be able to deactivate the survey and recopy it if we needed it for other semesters. So I'm going to do kind of a semi demo on the Question Pro piece of it, on how we designed it. So what we did do it is design it in blocks. That way, again, if we needed to change how the questions came out in the future, it was easier to do doing it in blocks. So we did just an introduction, the student information, and the requester information. Because even though they did sign on, we still wanted them to put their name and information to know who the request was coming from. And this is how our start. We just have some basic information on the front part. So this is the first block. Oops. I did what Jeff did earlier. Okay. So we did do a matrix, a spreadsheet matrix. We limited to 20 students. We just picked 20 because it was just a random number. There was really no reason. But these are all text blocks. Sorry, okay, there it goes. So they're all text blocks, so that's all free form. And the only issue with it this way is that if I needed to make it required, a field required, I couldn't just do one. It actually made me require it for every single student. Not every, some requests only had one applicant. Some had 20. So it was that was kind of an issue we had with it this way. But we did make it, again, easier to read. The MPL ID, the degree name, the plan code, the campus, and then their semester. We kept it simple on what we needed from them. I'm trying not to click too much here. Okay, oops, I went the other way, sorry. Okay, what we also did too was Question Pro, you can split up the column headings. And we did it at 10 because when you scroll to 10, you can actually, you lose what that heading is. So if they had the 20 students and forget, okay, what am I putting here? They would repeat it so that way they can see, okay, here's information I need. And then here is a signature or request information, request information box information. And there's a signature box that we're asking them to sign for that accountability piece. And then where they're putting in the information. All right. And then again, here's just a sample of what Question Pro does kick out. So this is the email that we were getting as soon as it hit submit. I was getting this email, as was Jeff as well. And this is just so we can track volumes to see how many we're getting, and also to have an idea when we look at the end result, we know kind of what number we're looking at, how many considers we should have for that time period. And then here is actually the Google Sheet. Again, I did blur out some information because I only had one column to blur out. And this is how it kicked out on the Google Sheet. And this is where, I'm sorry, wrong slide. This is just how it looks like when you scroll down on the email to Question Pro. Sorry about that. Yeah, this is the email again, just how the request information comes through. So it actually does show you the signature and then the information that they inputted. Okay, here's a Google Sheet one. And I only did a little snippet just to kind of show just how a lot of data that is coming through. And with the Google with the sheet, we were able to add some of the color to it to help it visually see it, and it did not mess with the import of the data. That's something we tested out just so that Jeff can see when he did his output, he can see, okay, this gray one is the first student, the white one is the second student, and so on. And it does that all throughout the Google Sheet. Kind of a bigger picture of the student information.
I just pulled out real quickly. You notice that we start at J. So the output from Question Pro, lots of columns, which made it fun.
But he was a master at that output. When I saw what he did, I was like, I just want to bow down to him what he did with it. Because I've had to do that with the data and it's not fun.
It's doing the same thing 20 times.
Oh, it did it, didn't it? Okay. Oh, it's a very sensitive mouse. Okay. And then this is what the data look like on the Google Sheet with the signature. It actually gives you a URL with the signature and then the information that they inputted in. And we would actually look at that to make sure, okay, this person, yes, is with that college. Okay, it is an authorized one, just to kind of spot check to make sure that we were getting good data. Okay, so part of our data review was our quality control piece of it, because Jeff and I were both getting the emails daily. I was also getting an email weekly from Question Pro, and I set it up in there to send me a scheduled email with all of the requests for the week. That way I can double check, because I didn't know what the volume was going to be, and I didn't want the entire data set. I parsed it out by week and would go and make sure that we had the right amount. That way when the emails were sent out, because we were sending out the emails weekly, and we wanted to make sure that the number I had is the number that he showed as well. So I was compiling and reconciling the data to make sure that it matched what Altrex was going to push out at the end. And again, there was duplicates. We did have some applicants that were reconsidered for different programs. That did happen. But there were also some user errors that we discovered where we inputted it for them because they were having issues, and then they went ahead and inputted it as well. So that was a lesson learned on our part. And then when errors were discovered, they inputted the wrong information, like the wrong plan code or the wrong semester. They did let us know, so we did have to remove those out of the data set. And then timing too. We had no real project plan for this because it was just, okay, we got to get this done yesterday. So we had a lot of trial and error on the timing. We finally established for this one, we had a cutoff of 12 p.m. So if you had it in by 12, you're making it for that week's email. If not, it had to go to the next. And that helped with reconciling the data as well, because we had a cutoff point, the exact one. Okay, so then from here, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeff to show you what he did with that Google Sheet.
So, once we got this up and running, that wrong way, I'm having great luck with the buttons today. Another way, can we have reported out those reconsidered folks? Oh, and can the admissions know what's going on with all that? Sure, I guess so. Yeah, okay, fine. So the big thing there, and again, with that Google Sheet, when you're looking at, so behind the scenes, I'm taking all those big long columns across the board, and I'm basically consolidating them into one sheet that has all the IDs, all the program plans, and all the information I need to process through the rest of this. So what I'm doing is I'm going back through the applications. So that's a link back to that application table. I'm going through, at this point, I was filtering for master, and you'll see there in the middle, the little book with the plus, that's a join to the Google Sheet. So it's taking that cleaned up data from Question Pro, joining it against the data from the application table to show us some results from what happened with that reconsideration. At this point, we were looking at based on ID and academic planning code. Actually, the process this year also pull an application number to give us a little higher level of detail and be more exact. And also, it provides a better student opportunity because we do have students who have multiple different applications. And so it's kind of when we practice now to say that each application can be considered, not just each applicant. So we've been able to kind of enhance that and improve the students improve the process for the students as well. What we're also doing along the way is joining to SFE Contact, which is a Salesforce contact ID table, and pulling that so that for that email process, we were able to provide that both to our own communication staff to fuel that weekly email, as well as to admissions for any communication purposes they might have. Going through, and then I'm also then coming out and outputting it back into the Google Sheet to go all those different places. So we had an applicant tracking sheet that we could use for our own internal tracking purposes. That was also modified and shared with admissions to help fuel their processing of it. And then again, we were also then used a version of that to go to our communication staff to help with the weekly email. So all of this at this point was being done primarily within Google Sheets. And then it was asked, hey, can we move that out into more of a public facing or a more user facing version? And so that a lot of that Google Sheet content got turned into a Tableau workbook. And I may be skipping ahead. So yeah, sorry about that.
All right. So before that email went out, again, we did that data validation. I was looking, already validating the data on my end on what was inputted by the academic units. And then Jeff was doing the same thing on his end because we're looking for duplicates. We're making sure, again, our numbers matched. And then we had to report this out also to our department to show, here's what we're getting weekly. So all that was going simultaneously in the background as we're doing this. Once we did get that information, it went to our communications team, and they were actually sending the emails out manually through Salesforce Marketing Cloud. With the list, they were able to do it, but it was a manual process that she had to sit there and wait for us to say, yes, the data is validated, then send the emails to Marketing Cloud. And then she would also send an email to admissions to say, okay, they're there for you, go ahead and process these. Very manual process. End of Friday night, not night, but evening, afternoon, a good couple hours us just doing this because it was so manual. Yes, each student got their own email saying you're being reconsidered for the program. You'll be hearing from admissions soon is the gist of it. More cleaned up and prettier. So each student received that email. The question was if it was done one by one for those that were listening on Zoom. So yes, each email was individual.
I do believe there was a batch process in Salesforce from our communications team. So they take the 20 new reconsidered applicants from the last week and then trigger the email off to those 20 students in that Friday afternoon process.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was still manual for her to go in there and load everything up. So there was still time for her to do that.
Oh, there was, I think there were a couple of weeks where we only had like 3 people or something like that. So, you know.
But there were some weeks we had 100. So it did vary throughout the process. And I think we were, 30 days is the whole process. I think 5 weeks was our total time frame on it. Oh, and this is yours.
Oh, yeah, so then they also want to know about duplicate applicants and folks that are being submitted for reconsideration multiple times. So again, I built into the workflow and a process to identify those duplicates and kick it back out again to that Google Sheet. So we were trying to keep that Google Sheet as much as possible as a one-stop shop for our graduate college staff to go and see all the information related to especially the procedural nature of this. And again, be able to prep that then for more public in terms of other users and adapt that later on. Yeah, so we got back to there. So this is kind of recap. They want to know, hey, what's happened with all these folks. I had that internal tracking sheet going within our Google Sheet. So this is what I was referring to. So I basically adapted that existing output and plugged it into a Tableau, into a user table, an ADB user table, that then both informed that went to inform the Tableau workbook. So you'll see the Google Sheet output there and then branched it off and end up sending over to the user table to use in Tableau. And you'll see again, for sake of the entire screen of blurry, we were putting out about what were the outcomes from those reconsideration requests. And this was more at the individual applicant level. So we're looking at, what college had requested the reconsideration campus, the requested plan name, plan code, and then all the student information. And then we would include kind of downstream, we'll see, or on the other side of this, and the sorting by what their application status was for that plan code. So again, I'm joining based on info ID and the requested plan code to search for any application that fit those, that fit with those, and then pulling that back into the report. We did have some that never came through for whatever reason, and so they were identified kind of as a blank and given the status of, no plan code found, to be able to report back on an individual level. And then we also flipped that into there we go. So this was the kind of the overall when we went to go and try and summarize our results, put into a table format like this. So this is more looking at a by college, by requested plan level. This is, so what you see here, these are results as of September 26th. At some point, because we were keeping this process along, I tried my best to take a snapshot of it, file it away in the archive so we'd have access to it. But as of September 26th, this is what our results look like. So you can see we had a variety of, and this is kind of just a snippet of it. This is not the entire segment. This is just the bottom. So there's a lot more colleges and stuff up top. But in terms of grand totals, you can have just a little overview sense here, but you can see we have a number of different colleges submit for reconsideration, campuses request plans, and then looking at what the outcomes are based on application status from that application table that I mentioned previously. If you're more of a visual learner and you like pretty pictures, here's a little bit more of a direct breakdown of what our outcomes look like. So you can see we had about, I think it was 432 total requests submitted. Of those, we ended up, again, based on the application status from the admissions application table, we ended up with 338 being discontinued for whatever reason. But the sweet spot, the goal there is that we had 27 go to an enrolled status. So in terms of outcomes of the project and the effort, that's around what we were looking at on September 26th, and based on that admissions table.
Right, because we were expecting maybe 100 total submissions to this process, and we had over 400. We were surprised, but also very happy that it was being used. Which brought us to our future, is we just didn't stop with fall 2022. We looked at, okay, how are we going to do this for other semesters? How can we increase it? Because we did start so late, we knew that was going to be a factor, that people were going to make decisions. So we might have gotten them to them too late to make that decision and come to us. So we expected that. So some of the lessons learned, and some things that we had to consider for this next semester was that we weren't going to enter the data for anybody else. It had to be done by that person so we can reduce the number of duplicates. That way the data is cleaner. All the test data we also learned is recorded, so we have to remove it before you go live, or else it's going to skew your numbers in Question Pro. And then also, because there were some that were made in error, we didn't want them to go through the process, because then it could potentially generate an email. We learned that with Question Pro, if you delete an entry in the middle of your data set, it will still input that data, and it won't override the next one, but it puts it in that next empty field. So it'll start pushing all your other data down. So we realized that we're like, why is it not sequential? So that was something that we tested and realized, okay, if we do delete something because it's a valid error, we need to remove that blank entry. Also, the timing of the emails was a big one, because there was a lot of time spent her getting her information ready, even though it was a batch process in Marketing Cloud. We still wanted to get a better time frame on that and make it easier. Again, it was about efficiency with the entire process. So improvements, okay, how could we looked at how can we streamline any part of it? How can we refine the data for reporting purposes as well? So one thing was what Jeff mentioned earlier, we needed the application number, because it's going to help him with the data set later on. So we started asking for that, which because of that, we wanted it to be required. So we did have to change the design of what was being inputted. The target was also changed. And we not for this semester, for spring 2023, but for future, we have included in their international students. Right now, I think they may or may not be in that time frame. So we know may not be possible for spring, but it will be possible for summer. So the data set Jeff has set up is now to allow it for all incoming semesters. That way they are included. And we also automated those emails that are going to go out instead of weekly. Now we're going to do it daily. One other thing we found out was that admissions was very eager to get in there. So we were having some timing issues with that. So now, because of how we automated the emails, as soon as it's emailed, now admissions has that information up front. So that timing is minimized. That error rate for that timing is minimized. And once the application number is submitted, Jeff has made it on his data set to remove it from a potential applicant that could be used. Did I miss anything on that part, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that covered it. Again, the goal here is that it becomes a rolling report. So it's not, we're not doing as much term by term setup. It's, you can see everyone that's coming, go for it, and get those folks processed. And so that's, you know, we've already had, I think, I think we're up to maybe a couple dozen submissions so far for this current process and this current cycle. And at least a couple of those have been for fall. Certainly the great majority have been for spring, but I think 2 at least have come through for fall already. So we're hopefully allowing academic unions to get an earlier start. And especially because when we added that, we loosened the international population, that boosted the numbers pretty significantly when we started looking at fall. So that's one thing that I think we'll see more of coming through this process as we move forward.
We left the same criteria as the 3.0 GPA, so that's still in effect. And also, I didn't mention this earlier, but it was a first come, first serve. So if whoever got that student, the applicant first is the one who actually got that reconsider. We still have that in place for this, which is where we look for the duplicate. So we are expecting that duplicate if 2 different colleges are wanting that student or the applicant for that same application number. So kind of go over the changes we've made. So one was in Question Pro. So what we did do was change it from a 20 row just to a 1 row and added the question, do you have an additional student? So that did change the data set on Jeff's end because it added an additional column after each student. So he had to account for that. But then this allows us to make it required. So every single text box is a required field now. And if you hit no, it takes you right to the end of the survey. Oh yeah, also we put in this little help text where to find the application number, which is on his initial Tableau data. Just in case they didn't see it, they know where to go get it.
And the applications report, the employee ID and the application number are highlighted in maroon just to make it very apparent, give a visual cue that these things should be important.
Yeah, so here's a little, it just, you click yes to add an additional student. So, and because I was able to copy the survey from the past, I was able to reuse it and not mess with the first survey that we used for fall 2022.
So this, we talked about trying to move towards a more automated email process. And so this was basically a copy and paste from another data model that we use heavily. But this is where without putting information about who's been reconsidered, this all leads to a FTP file that is exported and then imported into Salesforce Marketing that then queues the journey. I believe the terminology is to queue that runs the daily jobs for the emails for any new students that are added to the list. So ultimately what's happening is we've got one workflow that's firing about, I think it's 7 or 8 in the morning, that it's updating the denied applications report, it's updating all the Google Sheets, it's updating the reconsidered, both the summary and the individual results, and it's providing the data for this export. So we've got one workflow that's doing about 4 or 5 different things for us in this process, and it's allowing us to stay ahead. Because the other thing here is, again, the email should be firing. I think the email is scheduled to go at 8 a.m. every morning, around 8-ish. And so that's going to beat that's going to beat before admissions is going to see their sheet updated and be able to process the folks, which was kind of where the wrinkle was, is that admissions was processing folks and sending the notification before our weekly email was going out.
I'll go through that Salesforce piece. right here. So again, we use the CSV file that was generated from what Jeff did, and it was placed on the FTP server. And then we did an automation studio where it would grab the data from that file and import it to a data extension. We use that data extension, then in the journey that would send the emails. And that journey also checks for duplicates, just does a second to check to make sure if any came through. And it will not send it. And then because of that, then now admissions, based on that other workflow that Jeff just showed, now they go in there right away and see, okay, who do I have for the day? So the timing on that may be 30 minutes, maybe to an hour, where you can maybe get a duplicate, which is a lot less than maybe a 5-day window where admissions would process something before we send an email. So that really, we were able to live with that hour and a half versus 5 days. In PeopleSoft, this part, or the entire process, at this point right here after admissions, once they have the information, they go in there and make those updates to PeopleSoft. That I'm not sure how they're doing. That's the process that they own. So we didn't track that piece of it. We were just tracking up to the piece of them getting the information. Do you know if they're doing it manually, Janet? The question was if PeopleSoft was being done, updated manually, and we believe it is being updated manually. Yeah.
And that's been reflected on the data we've been seeing so far. My observation from fall 22 is there's some variance in terms of how some of that procedure might have gone, and maybe I certainly might be missing something in terms of some of the gaps there. But this semester, in terms of the data I've seen coming back out, is they're taking the existing application, changing the plan code and putting it back to application, waiting for department review. Or I think that's the application status is something like that.
Yeah, so that's actually a good segue to the actual flow. So the flow actually really didn't change what we were using. It's still the same flow. What changed was now the automation within it. So some automation was done up here in the front where students were identified. The Google Sheets and the question press still stayed the same because it was just a matter of just updating the form for now this go around. If we use the same one for other semesters, it's just going to be a copy and paste just so we can keep track of the semesters because we're not anticipating any changes up to this point. But if we do, it's not a lot of man hours to do that. Again, some more automation was done here on the transform data piece. And then we automated the Salesforce Marketing Cloud piece. And because of the timing, it eliminated the need for us to manually notify admissions. So now they just go into the Google Sheets and get the information they need, and they can do that daily because these emails are going out daily. And reporting, again, Jeff automated a lot more of that as well. So the process really stayed the same. It's just we used the tools themselves to automate more of the data. And that's the end of our presentation officially. Is there any other questions that anybody has?
My apologies. Just a curious question. My apologies if this was just discussed in the beginning. I was a little bit late, but it sounds like there's a report of people have been denied, and then the responsibility is on the academic unit to go in and say, we like this one. Was there ever any discussion about pre-identifying students that might be good fits for colleges based off any of their incoming information? Like, well, if you are denied for computer science, you might really be good for business analytics. I don't know, something of that.
Good question. And actually, that's one of the goals we're trying to get to still. We're starting it with this. So in the end initiative, that is something we are looking at to do. Yes. So it's not there yet, but we're building that block with this part of it, doing it manually of them going in after the fact. But that is one goal ultimately, is to do that preemptive review. You know what? They're not good for this, but you know what? They may be good for this one. Yes. Good question.
I want to yield to Janet. Do you have anything to add to that since you happen to be in the room?
It is a great question. I have been trying to get units on board with formalizing the pairings that make sense. And they can do that so that those can happen seamlessly without even this process. The problem with not formalizing it and letting, units look is that sometimes there are pairings that you may not think make sense, but for some reason the student would like. And that's therein lies the issue. There have been some that have enrolled that are in a new program I would have never thought, based on their original application, they would be interested in. Sometimes it'll surprise you, and it may just be a goal of having a master's degree per se, as opposed to a certain subject. So that's why I think it's not as restrictive, but for those that make sense, I've been trying to encourage the units to formalize those.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Or 12, okay. Any other questions? Anything on chat? Sherry? Okay. Hold on, okay, go ahead.
I'm curious if there are any plans to allow the student to choose if multiple programs are interested in a single student, instead of it being first come, first serve for the program, but to actually let the student decide which is a better fit for them.
I'll let Janet answer that.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I'm Janet Duke, Assistant Director of Graduate Support in the Graduate College. They've been, doing all of the work behind the scenes. I've been kind of communicating with units about this initiative. We partner with admissions on this and Ed Plus, but we don't necessarily own the application process. So there's, limited things that we can do. But however, having said that, I have heard from some units who capture that sort of information by utilizing their supplemental application, in which they add questions about if, this is not the right program, what other programs may be of interest to you, or what are your goals? And they utilize that to capture that information and then coordinate with that other unit to look at that student.
Yeah, we also did hear feedback that some of the academic units were actually proactively contacting these students before they submitted them for fall 2022, asking them, did you want to be reconsidered for this program? And I think if they said yes, they submitted their name, or they were calling a lot. I'm talking hundreds of students, because this first data set had how many, Jeff? I think over 2,000 denied applicants. So I know they called a lot, because some of them had, I think some of them submitted at least 200. So they were making those phone calls asking.
I'll clarify. I think the 2,000 was with doctoral candidates. So I think once they were removed, we were down to about 1,000. This is all very fuzzy memory.
The big circle discontinuation is just sticking out in my head, but can you clarify that discontinuation? Does that mean they didn't go ahead and take the next step and enroll? Because the student don't usually become discontinued status until like a certain time period. And by then, on the time step of 9/26, they should still be active and can enroll into Spring B. So just curious of the clarification.
I don't know that I can necessarily speak to that directly in terms of it. More, it's data coming from admissions, and so if anyone from admissions in the room, or if anyone could speak to that directly, I just don't feel comfortable doing that interpretation.
The question was, how can we get students to enroll if they're in that bubble? I don't know. What can they do, Janet? I know this is a data question.
I think that question.
He can tell you the data. That part.
I think what Amy said is what some of the units were doing. They were proactively reaching out to students to kind of sell their program, to see if the students would gain interest. It's very cumbersome, but I know that that's what some units were doing, which is why you may have seen such a large number in the big bubble. And then when it goes down, because some were never even acted upon, if the student said, oh, I already enrolled this place, which was part of it as well because of the timing, or I'm not really interested in that program. Yeah, so the students had already been told they were denied, right? So that some of them, well, I got denied to my program of interest. I'm going to go to this other place instead. So that's why we're hoping with it being earlier, now that they created this automated process, that we'll be able to capture a larger number in the future.
All right, so we're out of time, everybody. We want to thank you for your attention. Thank you for the questions. You had really good questions, and we hope you learned something from us a little bit. And have a good lunch. All right.
If you have specific questions, feel free to look us up and follow up.